Apollo Saturn launch control, T-minus 55 minutes and counting, and the countdown continues to go well.
This is Mission Control.
Houston, at the present time, the flight controllers here in Mission Control are monitoring the countdown.
And the status of the crew.
The launch vehicle and the spacecraft.
The vast emptiness, an inky black canvas splash with 1 billion burning pinpricks, each a sun, a world unto itself. Yet, for all its majesty, space breeds a primal unease, a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. We venture out there, brave pilgrims in pressurized tins, seeking knowledge, pushing the boundaries of human reach. But what lurks in the cosmic abyss? What unsettling sights have met the eyes of astronauts? Eyes forever changed by the unknowable. Join us as we peer into the shadows, where the only truth is what they brought back with them, and what they dared to tell.
With an incredibly alarming situation, really this is the last thing you'd want to find in space, aside from an alien facehugger on board. A freaking air leak. On the 6th of June of 2018, the Soyuz MS-09 mission launched. 3 astronauts, including a Russian commander and 2 flight engineers, 1 American and 1 German, were transported to the International Space Station. For a couple of months, their time on the ISS was pretty routine as being in the middle of space can be, anyway. That was until the 29th of August. It was in the middle of the night, and the crew received a message from Mission Control. They detected a slight change in air pressure and found that there was a small air leak. There was a 2mm hole in the orbital module. So 2 millimeters, tiny, but in space, this would be incredibly alarming. Fortunately, they managed to seal up the hole and there were no more changes in air pressure, but they had some questions as to how this hole got there in the first place. And it turns out something shady could have gone on. Apparently this hole had been hidden with a, quote, low-quality patch job and had apparently been created with a drill. Russian officials became suspicious of NASA, accusing them of intentionally sabotaging the mission. There were even theories that one of the crew members themselves drilled the hole, as it was found to have been drilled from the inside. A Russian tabloid accused the American astronaut on board of creating the hole after she apparently had a failed romantic relationship with another member of the crew. Just really outlandish stuff. The whole thing was a complete mess, and we still don't know exactly what went on here. Next on the list we have the Space Snake. Story Musgrave is a retired NASA astronaut who's had more experience in space than most in the field. He also has 6 degrees, he's a physician, a mathematician. The man is incredibly experienced and intelligent. He also firmly believes that there is life out in space, and he may have had a first-hand experience. He claimed to have seen an 8-foot-long snake-like creature on 2 separate space missions. He was featured on an episode of the TV series Sightings, speaking about his odd experiences with the creature, and was quoted saying, "On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there, 6, 7, 8 feet long. It is rubbery because it has internal waves in it, and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of brings to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there. Some incredibly primitive, more primitive, some just proteins coming together, amino acids, and just some single-cell organisms, and other civilizations that have been around for a million years that are doing unimaginable kinds of things." The SpaceX CRS-7 incident. The SpaceX-7 was a mission to send an uncrewed spacecraft, the Dragon, to resupply the International Space Station. It was the Dragon's 9th flight. It launched from the Falcon 9 launch vehicle, and at first, everything seemed fine, but 139 seconds into the launch, a cloud of white vapor appeared, and there was a sudden loss of pressure in the liquid oxygen tank of the Falcon 9's rocket's second stage. The rocket continued for a few seconds before breaking apart. The Dragon CRS-7 capsule was thrown clear of the explosion and hit the ocean. SpaceX said the capsule could have been saved if the parachutes had deployed, but the software didn't have the right instructions for that situation. It was found that a metal piece called a strut had failed. This particular strut held a high-pressure helium bottle in place within the rocket's liquid oxygen tank. Because the strut failed, helium rushed into the tank, causing too much pressure, and it eventually burst. Now, luckily, there was nobody on board. Again, this was an unmanned mission, but it just goes to show how much of a risk spaceflight is. Every time astronauts launch into space, they're risking their lives. Things can just go wrong at the drop of a hat. The same goes for this next failed mission, the Cygnus Orb 3. Again, nobody aboard, but it would have been disastrous if there was. So this was an attempted flight of an automated cargo spacecraft. Again, it would have brought food and supplies to the crew of the International Space Station. This would have been Cygnus's fourth flight to the ISS. The Antares rocket carrying the Cygnus spacecraft launched on October 28th, 2014. Just 15 seconds after liftoff, though, there was a failure in the first stage's propulsion system. The rocket started falling back to the launch pad. This could have been quite a disaster. A rocket plummeting into the Earth, might cause some bodily harm to workers down there. So in order to prevent that from happening, the range safety officer activated the flight termination system. Basically, the thing self-destructed just before hitting the ground. How awesome would it be to press a button that makes a rocket explode in midair? I imagine it being a big red button with explode written on it, but it's probably a bit more sophisticated than that. This explosion was so intense, though, that it could be felt 20 miles away. Thankfully, no one was injured, but there was substantial damage to the launch pad. Next on the list, we have the Nauka thruster glitch. Nauka, or the Multi-Purpose Laboratory Module, is a module of the International Space Station. When it successfully docked on the station on July 29th of 2021, something kinda scary happened. Its thrusters started acting up, causing the entire station to rotate around. So the Nauka successfully docked with the ISS, and everything seemed fine, but a few hours later, while the crew was preparing to open hatches, Nauka's onboard computers had a glitch. This caused the module to unexpectedly fire its thrusters, making the ISS suddenly rotate. Now, astronauts are trained to deal with stuff like this. They know that glitches can happen and things can go wrong, but just imagining being out in a rotating space station in the middle of the black void of space, that's a pretty freaky situation to be in. Ground controllers were able to fix the glitch, though, and the station eventually returned to its proper position. All right, you know what really sucks? Toilet trouble. Issues with plumbing, it just completely upends your life. You feel lost and confused. As bad as a broken toilet is here on Earth, though, imagine being stuck up in space and realizing you have a busted crapper. That is a truly horrifying thing to discover. In 2021, astronauts departing from the ISS realized they were going to have to head back to Earth without a toilet. The 4 astronauts had a 20-hour journey back to Earth in their SpaceX capsule, and they'd have to do their business in diapers the entire time. Oh, and this is the same crew that had to endure the whole thruster malfunction that had the entire space station rotating, by the way. Not the luckiest bunch here. By Earth standards, anyway. By astronaut standards, I guess they kind of are pretty lucky, because they made it to space and back without, dying. Next up, we have even more toilet trouble. Turns out there's been issues on the International Space Station as well. This incident happened back in 2019. The crew of the ISS was attempting to upgrade their toilet and ended up causing a water leak. The toilet they currently had on board had been installed in 2008 and was a bit outdated. This new universal waste management system would be less clunky, it was cleaner, and just overall more efficient. But one of the water pipes leaked and 2.5 gallons of water started floating about the station, which the astronauts then had to collect. Luckily, the pipe leaked before the toilet was officially christened, because that would have been truly nightmarish. Floating around, collecting water, fine. Actually might have been kind of fun. Floating around in space having to gather up yellow or brown water, not quite as enjoyable. I also don't know why they didn't install that toilet when the capsule was still on the ground, but oh no, it's on the space station. It's up in space. Never mind. In June of 1965, astronauts Ed White and James McDivitt spotted something strange while passing over Hawaii. They were in a Gemini spacecraft when they spotted something that looked like a UFO. It was metallic, and they also described it having long arms. sticking out of it. McDivitt spotted the object while White was asleep. He grabbed a 16mm film camera to try and take footage of the object. White then woke up, saying he spotted the thing as well. McDivitt contacted the capsule coordinator, attempting to describe what they were seeing. In part of the transcript, McDivitt is quoted saying, "I just saw something else up here with me, but just as I was getting close enough to take a good picture, the sun got in the way and I lost it." He went on to say, "It had big arms sticking out of it, it looked like. I only had it for just a minute. I got a couple of pictures with a movie camera and one with the Hasselblad, but I was in free drift. Before I could get the control back, I drifted and lost it." Now this one needs to be taken with a grain of salt, or a lot of grains. It's a Reddit post made by a now deleted user attempting to stay anonymous. They claim to be an ex-astronaut who experienced something strange while on a mission, and I just think this is a spooky story, real or not. They write, "I can't disclose my identity, but let's just say I've been around the celestial block a few times. It was a routine spacewalk checking the exterior of the ISS. Everything was humming along when I noticed this faint glow just beyond the Earth's horizon. At first I thought it was the sun playing tricks, but this was different. It was a subtle shimmer, almost mirage-like. I radioed Houston to check if there were any anomalies, but they said all systems were normal. It was just strange, a gentle, pulsating light, and not blinding, but kind of hypnotic. As I reached out to grab a handrail, I felt a strange, static charge. That's when things got downright eerie. I saw these tiny, luminous particles dancing around me, forming intricate patterns. Suddenly, the particles converged into this figure, humanoid in shape, but made of pure light. It just hovered there, staring at me. No facial features, just a luminous silhouette. The next thing I knew, the figure disappeared into those shimmering particles and floated away. I radioed Houston, but they couldn't pick up anything unusual on their end. I finished the spacewalk, returned to the station, and went about my duties like nothing happened. But every time I look down at Earth, I can't shake the feeling that there's something out there, something beyond our understanding. Call it space-induced hallucination or whatever, but I swear that encounter was unlike anything I've ever experienced. And finally, we have the tale of the knocking. So in 2003, Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei was launched on his first mission up to the vast darkness of space. He was China's first man in space. He was sent up in a small craft all alone. Again, first time. Brave dude right here. Going up to space would be scary enough as it is, but things got creepy when Liwei started hearing something. He was in space all alone when he began hearing what sounded like a knock on the spacecraft. He described it as, quote, "someone knocking the body of the spaceship, just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer," and went on to say it neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship. He took a look outside the porthole and nothing, which was actually probably a relief. Here on Earth, if we heard a knocking sound on our door and opened it only to find there was nothing there, we'd be totally freaked out, right? But in space, probably for the best, we don't see anyone or anything. Once he returned to Earth, he tried to recreate the sound, but was never able to. It's still a mystery as to what happened out there.
First on our list today, we have Project Overcast, more commonly known by the name Operation Paperclip. The project was an effort that took place after the Second World War between 1945 and 1959. The goal was to bring the top scientists from Germany and Austria over to the United States for employment opportunities, giving the US a significant leg up in the world of scientific and technological development advancements. Of course, the United States government was not at all naive to the fact that during the time of recruitment, Germany was heavily occupied by, well, I'm not allowed to say it, but it rhymes with Yahtzees. Harry Truman, president at the time, made sure to put measures in place to forbid NASA from bringing into the country any such recruitments. Did NASA listen? No. And among the recruits was infamous Wernher von Braun, who played a key role in the development of the V-2 rocket for Yahtzee, Germany. And Wernher wasn't the only one of his kind to be recruited and given asylum by the US. In fact, there were hundreds more recruited by NASA, making Operation Paperclip one of the agency's largest political scandals to date. Speaking of scandals, and remember this is part 2, so really nothing NASA does at this point should be coming as a surprise to any of us, but once again it seems that they've managed to make the impossible happen. If you've seen part 1, you know that unfortunately many astronauts and cosmonauts have lost their lives either in space or on the ground due to tragic and sometimes avoidable accidents. Well, the very small sliver of a saving grace would have to be that when this happened, at least the families are well taken care of, right? Well, wrong. In fact, you might be just as shocked as I was to learn that all the way up until 2003, astronauts working under NASA had not one shred of life insurance. In fact, in preparation for the Apollo 11 moon landing mission, Neil Armstrong, Edwin, Buzz Aldrin, and the rest of the team actually signed autographs so that their loved ones would have something of value to sell should the astronauts be unable to make it home. Of course, the policies have changed, but the fact that it took NASA until 2003 to do it, not a great look. Okay, for our next point, let's move on to something a bit more positive. While NASA has been known for making some pretty negative faux pas, there's no denying that on the flip side of their downfalls, they have been able to achieve some pretty amazing things. Some things we're aware of, such as the moon landing, the International Space Station, and the Hubble telescope, and some things we've been kept in the dark about. And this one is for my sci-fi fans. In 2015, a document was released revealing that NASA had been working on a very special feat, achieving warp drive technology acceleration beyond the speed of light. Sounds pretty far out there, right? Well, I guess NASA has a far reach, as in April of 2015, a team working on various concepts for spacecraft thruster advancements seems to have accidentally done the impossible when lasers shot through a renaissance chamber traveled at an accelerated rate of over 300 million meters per second. The speed of light is 299,792,458 meters per second. While this is incredible, the team who achieved this scientific anomaly doesn't actually know how they did it, and so naturally they haven't been able to do it since. Next up on our list today, we have the Boeing X-37 space plane, a highly secretive, unmanned space shuttle that has been known to orbit Earth for up to 908 days at a time. While the spaceship isn't under NASA's name, it definitely falls under their jurisdiction, as it is said that its year-long missions, carried out by the US government, are in an effort to conduct technological experiments. The space plane is quite small, taking off and landing via a runway, and while its mission logs are sealed, it has been photographed on many occasions. It has been highly speculated that the purpose of the space plane is much more than simply conducting experiments and collecting data, with some saying that it has been used to spy on foreign countries and governments, and others believing that it is a preemptive protection measure for imminent upcoming space war. What do you guys think? And of course, at our halfway point, we're gonna keep things light today and talk a little bit about a topic that is so overplayed, but also never really gets old, and that is aliens. More specifically, aliens on Mars. Now, we're gonna have to take this one with a grain of salt, but do me a favor and try your best to keep an open mind. In 2014, Jackie, a woman who claimed to have worked on the Mars rover project in 1979, came forward to share her story. She told the public that while monitoring the rover's live video feed, she noticed two humanoid figures in what appeared to be spacesuits approach the camera. She ran to tell her bosses and then went to return to her station, but it seemed she'd been locked out of her room and the whole thing was covered up by the agency. While the figures were originally thought to be aliens, now many conspiracy theorists believe that perhaps what she uncovered was not extraterrestrial life forms, but rather a secret manned mission to Mars. And again, I'll let you guys decide the answer to this one. Alright, next up we have the James Webb Space Telescope, a $10 billion piece of highly advanced technological equipment sent into space on December 25th of 2021. If you think the Hubble is cool, you're gonna go crazy for this guy, because the James Webb Space Telescope was actually designed to capture images too far and too faint for the Hubble, making it quite possibly the most advanced telescope in existence to date. In fact, it has been reported by scientists at NASA that using the James Webb, they were actually able to see the edge of our universe, a previously unreachable feat. I really can't decide if that's terrifying or amazing, so I'm gonna go with both. Because of the incredible reach of the telescope and its ability to capture clear images even at a wildly far distance, many people believe that its quest for deep space discoveries has been used used as a cover-up for the fact that the United States government has been using the NASA-made Marvel to spy on the people of Earth and gather intel again on foreign governments. I mean, it's totally possible, but I think they have the Boeing for that, right? Okay, next on the list we have another pretty big embarrassment for the space agency. You know, the space agency that is said to be at the forefront of global technological advances. The agency employing some of America's top scientists, physicists, and engineers. Well, you'd think that based on NASA's roster, they'd have little to no problem when it came to keeping their systems secure and their secrets safe from outsider access, but, you know, NASA has actually been hacked a number of times, believe it or not, perhaps the most famous incident taking place in 1999 when James, at just 15 years of age, hacked into the agency's databases and obtained incredibly sensitive information, including source codes and proprietary software worth millions of dollars. In 2000, James came under the investigation of the FBI, but it wasn't until 2007 that he was arrested for his crimes, which included stealing data from NASA defense contractors. James, however, was never convicted of his crimes, as in 2008, after almost a full year of strenuous legal battles, it was reported that he took his own life in an attempt to escape prosecution. The legitimacy of James's death, however, was called into question by many members of the public who wondered if it really was the young man's decision to end his own life, or if perhaps there was something much more sinister at play. Maybe a cover-up attempt by the government or NASA, fearing what might come to light should the case continue. Starting off our top 3 today, we have the incredibly elusive series of NASA missions to Africa. These strange occurrences came to light after NASA aircrafts were spotted touching down on an American airstrip located in Eastern Africa. When the agency was questioned about its presence in the foreign country, they had originally declined to comment. It wasn't until after the public began speculating their arrival in Africa to be in regards to military activity, anti-terror efforts, ground relief, and war preparation that NASA came forward with a statement, claiming that their reasoning for landing in Africa was to conduct ground observations that would allow scientists to better understand biodiversity in the area. Okay, but if that's true, why didn't they just say that in the first place? I don't know, you guys, something seemed off here, but as always, let me know what you think. Next on our list today, we have NASA refusing to recognize that they might just be way off in their calculations of Earth's close proximity asteroid sizes due to insufficient calculation methods. In a 33-page scientific paper released in 2013, author and co-founder of Intellectual Ventures, Nathan Myhrvold, highlighted the ways in which NASA had incorrectly calculated the size of 164,000 asteroids, and offered solutions for recalculating in order to correctly identify the threat level posed by each one. In the article, Nathan also stated that any mistake made by a factor of just 2 in diameter is a mistake of a factor of 8 in energy, meaning that any calculation of impact would change drastically with even the smallest calculated increase to an asteroid size. In 2018, 5 years after the initial reports were published, NASA responded to the paper saying that it contained many mistakes and lacked peer review, but they failed to provide to the public any new information backing their original methods and proving their original calculations. Perhaps NASA got it right, but honestly, if the Mars rover observer from part 1 of this video is any indication, I really don't trust their math. Like, at all. And finally on our list today, we have NASA's solar competition. Solar power competition, that is. NASA became pretty sheepish when a number of reports were released stating that far ahead of them in the pursuit of a large-scale solar energy source is none other than China. Furthermore, it appears that not only is China ahead of NASA when it comes to sun-powered renewable energy, but they are actually at the forefront of solar energy development as a whole. Solar panels created by scientists in China are said to be some of the best in the world, collecting energy 24 hours a day, all year long. And China also has the largest solar farm in the world, which is so immense it can actually be seen from space. On top of all of this, the country has recently revealed plans to launch a commercial-scale solar-powered station in orbit by the year 2050, allowing them to directly harness the sun's energy from space and far surpass NASA's solar abilities to date.
We have the Fireflies. In February 1962, John Glenn noticed something strange outside the window while aboard the Friendship 7 spacecraft. He noticed strange glowing particles floating in space nearby that looked like fireflies. He radioed down to Mission Control saying, "This is Friendship 7. I'll try to describe what I'm in here. I'm in a big mass glass of some very small particles that are brilliantly lit up like they're luminescent. I never saw anything like it. They're round a little, they're coming by the capsule, and they look like little stars. A whole shower of them coming by. They swirl around the capsule and go in front of the window, and they're all brilliantly lighted. They probably average maybe 7 or 8 feet apart, but I can see them all down below me also. John then went on to say that they were moving very slowly and almost seemed to be matching his current speed. After a thorough investigation, NASA scientists deduced that the lights were probably frost flakes that were being lit up as they fell away from the craft. They admitted that that does kind of make them look like fireflies. Of course, there are still people out there online that insist this may have been first contact with some sort of glowing space bugs. Next up at number 9 now, we have the Glass Dome. Richard Hoagland is an author who wrote a conspiracy theory book about the Apollo missions called Dark Mission. Now in it, he claims that ancient builders constructed enormous domes enclosing huge areas of the moon's surface. They would have had water and air inside them at one point. He claims there are actually hidden lunar cities that appear blurred and distorted because they're being viewed through this glass. Of course, the next question is, where is he getting all this from? Well, he points out that Apollo 12 astronaut Alan Bean said that on that mission, space seen from the lunar surface was black but shiny as if it was being viewed through glass. Of course, Hoagland used this as proof of his glass dome theory, saying space should be velvet black, it should be inky black, it should be infinity, unending, deep, endless black, it shouldn't be shiny. This is something that Alan Bean has denied and does not claim himself, but the story has gained traction among some conspiracy theory groups. Moving on to number 8 now, we have Musa Manarov. That's the name of this former cosmonaut who is known for spending 541 consecutive days in space. It's safe to say he was an experienced cosmonaut who received numerous awards and honours. In all those years, he never reported anything too out of the ordinary, except for one time in 1991. That year, Manarov was on a mission to the Mir space station and was filming a visiting space capsule dock nearby. He filmed its approach. As he filmed its approach, he saw an object that looked like it was coming off the spacecraft. Here's some of that footage so you can see for yourself.
And this by Musa Manarov is the best known one from Russia, I believe.
Okay, I think we can immediately, being out in space here, dismiss the possibility that this is,
space is
a rock.
Now whatever that was, it freaked him out and he became convinced he had seen something unusual. He said he knew there was nothing that could come loose at that point during the docking procedure. As he continued to watch the object, it floated downwards and away from the capsule. When this footage began to be shared around the world, some people claimed it was nothing more than space junk, but Manarov said he knows what he saw up there and it was definitely not space junk. Next up at number 7 now guys, we have the dots. In March 2017, UFO hunters claimed they had found proof of aliens in NASA's own footage. The video in question shows astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti demonstrating how to operate window shutters on the ISS. Now as she talks to the camera in the video, we see several white objects coming into view. The UFO community quickly jumped on this and referred to it as the smoking gun. There was no denying a big alien cover-up now. Of course, there's always two sides to the story though. Scott Brando is a man who forensically examines alleged UFO pictures and videos. He gave this video the same treatment and concluded that the lights were either lens reflections or ice particles. Not quite as exciting, but maybe that's the truth. Moving on to number 6 now, we have the organic being. In August 2018, former NASA astronaut Leland Melvin tweeted out that he saw something curved and organic looking floating outside of his craft while aboard the space shuttle Atlantis. Naturally, the first thing he did was tell NASA about it, but they said what he was seeing was not extraterrestrial, but just a piece of ice. Now when he shared this story on Twitter, the Twitter account for UFO Sightings Daily asked him if he thought that NASA was lying about that. They believe that his opinion of something looking organic is much more reliable than the opinion of someone on the ground over 400 miles away. Melvin replied that he didn't think so, but you never know. Now some people even thought that Melvin might have made the whole thing up just to, I don't know, entertain people. All of this has left many questions about his story. Ice or organic being? Only Melvin really knows. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the wolves. This is an incredible story, honestly. It's a terrifying account from Russian cosmonaut Alexei Leonov. Now in 1965, he famously performed the first spacewalk ever. It was a success, but it was very nearly a disaster. During the walk, he experienced both air leaks in his suit and material unexpectedly stiffening. This meant he was almost unable to cram himself back inside the capsule. He actually had to lower his own suit pressure and risk getting the bends when he was inside. If that wasn't bad enough, his craft went off course during re-entry and landed in the Ural Mountains, where he and his commander were forced to wait for rescue as howling wolves began to encircle them. How crazy is that? Next time you guys think you've had a bad day, just spare a thought for Alexei Leonov. Alright, at the number 4 spot now guys, we have the cryptic message. In 2016, NASA astronaut Scott Kelly gave an interview that conspiracy theorists say contained cryptic messages about seeing aliens in space. In the video, he talked about his 340 days on the International Space Station, and then people say he slipped up and mentioned a cover-up by NASA and the US government. Kelly was asked about his body's response to being in space for so long. He said, and I quote, "Adjusting to space is easier than adjusting to Earth for me. I don't think I ever felt completely normal up there. I think coming back to gravity is harder than leaving gravity, so maybe the aliens got it a lot easier than we do." It was that mentioning of the word alien that sent alarm bells ringing among the conspiracy theorists. He also spoke about a virtual reality game that the astronauts play on the space station, which simulated an alien attack on the space station. Once again, conspiracy theorists were asking, why would NASA make such a violent game, especially one with such a terrifying scenario? Once again, this is one of those stories where it's NASA's word against people who just don't seem to trust NASA. What do you guys think though? Moving on to number 3 now, we have the flashing lights. This is a very famous set of stories if you're familiar with the moon landings. During the Apollo missions that took astronauts to the moon for the first time, several astronauts reported seeing strange flashing lights. They claimed that these lights flashed in their eyeballs even when their eyes were closed. On one mission, astronaut Charles Duke wore a helmet, closed his eyes, and he still described the light flashes he was seeing to his team. He said they were clusters of white streaks. They happened at the exact same moment that his helmet recorded cosmic rays passing through his helmet and his head. Coincidence? Well, apparently not. NASA confirmed that the astronauts were actually seeing cosmic rays, something we don't see here on Earth because they're all absorbed by our atmosphere. They're so powerful that you can even see them in space with your eyes closed. That's pretty mental. Moving on to the number 2 spot now, we have the floater. On the morning of August 19th, 2013, NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy noticed something floating outside of the International Space Station. Here's a little clip so you can see for yourself.
Chris Cassidy had noted an object that was floating past the station near the Station Progress 52 cargo ship.
Cassidy noticed this near the Progress cargo vehicle. He called down to Mission Control Houston and took some video of it. Now at first, NASA was just as confused as he was. Was this a UFO? It certainly fit the literal description of an unidentified flying object. After a lot of speculation, NASA said it was an antenna cover from Russia's Zvezda service module. However, many people remain totally unconvinced. They believe that the object is something extraterrestrial, not something of human origin, and that NASA has made up this cover story to avoid public alarm. Personally, as you might know by now, I believe NASA, but what do you guys think? And finally, at number 1 now, we have the saucer. This story comes from Donald Slayton, an astronaut during the Mercury missions. He revealed in an interview that he saw UFOs in 1951. He said, "I was testing a P-51 fighter in Minneapolis when I spotted this object. I was at about 10,000 feet on a nice, bright, sunny afternoon. I thought the object was a kite, then I realized that no kite is going to fly that high. As I got closer, it looked like a weather balloon, grey and about 3 feet in diameter, but as soon as I got behind the darn thing, it didn't look like a balloon anymore. It looked like a saucer, a disc. About the same time, I realized that it was suddenly going away from me, and there I was, running at about 300 miles per hour. I tracked it for a little way, and then all of a sudden the damn thing just took off. It pulled about a 45-degree climbing turn and accelerated and just flat disappeared." An interesting story, and it's of particular interest to UFO enthusiasts because neither Slayton or NASA has provided a rational explanation for this very speedy saucer.
Number 10, we have space snakes. Dr. Musgrave is a trustworthy man, or at least his credentials suggest he must be. Not only is he a NASA astronaut, he has 6 degrees, and he's a doctor and a mathematician. He has made 6 space flights, and he believes that there is life out there. In 1994, he said, "On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there." What? It's not just a wee little space snake either. He said that it was 6, 7 or 8 feet long. He said that the snake followed him around for a long period of time and he tried to communicate with it. Space snakes, honestly. Dr. Musgrave thinks that they must have their own propulsion technique, which honestly is just baffling and is a can of worms or snakes. Coming in at number 9, we have asteroids. Astronaut Chris Hadfield conducted a Reddit AMA and he discussed something that scared him. He said, "Sometimes we hear pings as tiny rocks hit our spaceship, and also the creaks and snaps of expanding metal as we go in and out of sunlight. The solar panels are filled with tiny holes from micrometeorites." Honestly, that really terrifies me as a person who's like a bit scared of flying in an aeroplane. This would deeply stress me out. He also said, "I watched a large meteorite burn up between me and Australia, and to think of that hypersonic dumb lump of rock randomly hurtling into us instead sent a shiver up my back." Like, I'll say Chris, mate, Jesus. Coming into number 8, we have the Formation. Gordon Cooper, the last American to spend time in space alone, has had a couple of very strange experiences in the skies. The first happened when he was a member of the Air Force. He was flying with other pilots in 1951 when he saw, I quote, "a vast armada of UFOs flying in formation at extremely high altitudes." I'm sorry, but vast armada, that is terrifying, not just one curious UFO, a whole fleet. On top of that, in 1963, Cooper was shot into space aboard a Mercury capsule to circumnavigate the world. As he was passing Perth, he noticed a fast-flying green object that was also picked up by Australian tracking systems. Now, the press were briefed that they were not allowed to talk to him about this. Why? Like, seriously, why? Coming into number 7, we have the check mark. American astronaut Leroy Chiao was the commander of the International Space Station in 2005. During his time up there, he saw some extremely weird things. He explained his encounter to the Huffington Post by saying, "I saw some lights that seemed to be in a line and it was almost like an upside down check mark, and I saw them fly by and I thought it was awfully strange." Could this have been the formation that Cooper was talking about? Some skeptics even tried to pass the lights off as far off fishing boat lights from Earth, but to be honest, I'm skeptical of those skeptics. Coming in at number 6, we have magnificent desolation. What is it like on the moon? Utterly terrifying according to Buzz Aldrin. Buzz, as we know, was the second man on the moon. Yes, televised recordings of the moon can be seen, and yes, we have high-res photographs, but truly knowing what it feels like to be up there is something only a handful of people can talk to us about. In a Reddit AMA, Buzz Aldrin describes his experience. He said, "My first words of my impression of being on the surface of the moon that just came to my mind are magnificent desolation." He continued by saying, "There is no place on Earth as desolate as what I was viewing in those first few moments on the lunar surface. Beyond me, I could see the moon curving away, no atmosphere, black sky, cold, colder than anyone could experience on Earth when the sun is up." While that sounds totally incredible, it also sounds like the beginnings of a total existential breakdown. Coming into number 5, we have the spheres. In 1981, following the Saljut mission, the USSR cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kolyvanov gave a press conference in which he shared some very interesting information. He said that he looked out of a porthole and saw something he simply couldn't explain, something impossible to the laws of physics. He described the object he saw as spherical and elliptical, saying that it exploded into a beautiful golden light. After that, he saw 2 more spheres and a white smoke sphere cloud. Then, as they flew through the Terminator, the name for the zone between light and day, he lost sight of them. Honestly, how fascinating and terrifying at the very same time. To me, it's also weird and interesting how Russia appears to be more forthcoming in discussing things that they've seen in space, whereas the United States are keen to keep a lid on it. Why do you think the United States are so heavily guarded on what they'll say about what they've seen in space? Honestly, I don't know. Coming into number 4, we have the knocking. In In 2003, Yang Liwei was the first Chinese astronaut to be propelled into space. Now I understand the loneliness of space might send you a little bit mad, but he said one night that he heard a strange and continuous knocking. He said, and I quote, "Someone was knocking on the body of the spaceship just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. It neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship." I'm sorry, but honestly, what? Isn't that some of the creepiest space descriptions that you've ever heard? It seems he wasn't the last to hear it either. 2 further astronauts heard the same space knocks when they went up there. What are these? Coming into number 3, we have the music. Listening to the transcript of the words said on board Apollo 10 is bone-chilling. The spaceship passed by the dark side of the moon, and as it did, the astronauts heard a very weird ethereal music. This is what was said between Eugene Cernan, Thomas Stafford, and John Young. That music sounds out of spacey, doesn't it? Do you hear that whistling sound? Yes. Boy, that sure is weird music. We're gonna have to find out about that. Nobody will believe us. Later, Cernan said, "That eerie music is what's bothering me. You know what? I hear it too." Who is going to believe it? Nobody. Should we tell them about it? I don't know, I think we ought to think about it some. It seems that the Apollo 11 crew heard it too. What was it? We don't really know. Coming into number 2, we have heat is rising in the capsule. So this is really sad and really disturbing, so do skip forward if you aren't ready for something truly terrifying. In 1967, Russian cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov did not make it back to Earth alive, something he suspected would happen when he agreed to be the solo pilot of the Soyuz 1. His spacecraft malfunctioned and he was quite aware he was going to die. Some of the last things he said can't be translated into words. He was screaming and crying words of anger. Among the last words that can be deciphered are, "The heat is rising in the capsule" and "You've killed me." Honestly, that makes me so sad. Finally, coming into number 1, we have "They're watching us." Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, had something very scary to say when he arrived at the moon in the Apollo 11 mission. It was something he spoke about once but never spoke about again. In a secret transmission to NASA, according to the retired chief of communications system Maurice Chatelain, the first man on the moon's first words were actually, "Oh God, you won't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." Now this wasn't heard by the world as the broadcast was dropped for 2 minutes. Armstrong never spoke about it again, although a lot of credible sources have confirmed that this is what he said.
Vladimir Komarov. Vladimir Komarov was the first astronaut who died directly in space. This was the first mission of the Soviet Soyuz 1 spacecraft on the 23rd of April 1967. Komarov was supposed to test the ship name in manned mode and conduct the world's first docking in space with another Soyuz 2 spacecraft. However, the plan never succeeded and Komarov became the first astronaut lost in space. After the launch of the Soyuz 1 spacecraft into orbit, one of the 2 solar panels did not open and the spacecraft began to lack electricity for the correct system operations. Komarov tried to open the panel by spinning the ship around its axis, but this did not help. Due to the malfunction, the launch of Soyuz 2 was cancelled and the flight of Soyuz 1 was terminated ahead of schedule. The spacecraft successfully deorbited, but after re-entry for unknown reasons, the parachute system failed. As a result, the descent vehicle hit the ground at a fast speed, which resulted in the astronauts' instant death. As a result, the parachute system was modified and the shortcomings were eliminated. Number 9. Hylian myth. Even though Komarov's death is considered to be the starting point of space travel deaths, there is a myth that he was not the first astronaut lost in space. An American science fiction writer, Robert Heinlein, claimed that a similar incident took place even before Gagarin's flight into space. On May 15, 1990, the USSR launched the Vostok 1 1KP prototype into orbit. The goal was to test the altitude control systems and the declaration engine to make sure that the ship was able to go into a descent path on the MCC command. However, the flight ended in failure. 1KP rose to a higher orbit and got stuck there
there for many years. Allegedly, the ship did not have life support systems, but many believed it was manned. The Western press wrote that the pilot, Gennady Zavadovsky, was on board. Such a person really existed, but at that time he was not part of the Soviet astronaut team, and Halian claimed that Soviet citizens told him about the astronaut during his visit to USSR. However, I cannot, in all fairness, prove the myth by adding this alleged death to the question of has anyone been lost in space. Number 8. Clifton Williams. Clifton Williams was an American naval aviator, test pilot, mechanical engineer, major in the US Marine Corps, and a NASA astronaut who was killed in a plane crash. To be clear, he never went into space, but this was part of the space program. The crash was caused by a mechanical failure to a NASA T-38 jet trainer, which he was piloting to visit his parents in Mobile, Alabama. The failure caused the flight controls to stop responding, and although he activated the ejection seat, it did not save him. The aircraft crashed in Florida near Tallahassee within an hour of departing Patrick AFB. Number 7. X-15 Flight 191. During X-15 Flight 191 on November 15, 1967, Michael J. Adams had his 7th flight, and the plane had an electrical problem followed by control problems at the apogee of its flight. Adams was an American aviator, aeronautical engineer, and USAF astronaut. He was one of the 12 pilots who flew the North American X-15, an experimental space plane jointly operated by the Air Force and NASA. On November 15, 1967, Adams flew X-15 Flight 191, also known as X-15 Flight 36597, aboard the X-15-3, one of the 3 planes that X-15 had in its fleet. Flying to an altitude above 50 miles, Adams qualified as an astronaut, according to the United States definition of the boundary of space. Moments later, the aircraft broke apart, killing Adams and destroying the X-15-3. He was the first American space mission fatality by the American Convention. Number 6. Apollo 1. Apollo 1, initially designed as AS-204, was intended to be the first crewed mission of the Apollo program, the American undertaking to land the first man on the moon. It was planned to launch on February 21, 1967, as the first low Earth orbital test of the Apollo Command and Service Module. During a plugs-out test of the Apollo hardware, which its first version could be charitably described as a flying turd, a combination of factors including overpressure, pure oxygen environment, an egress hatch that opened inward, and excessive Velcro and other flammable material, plus a spark from somewhere under the astronauts' couches caused a cabin fire. This happened during a launch rehearsal test at Cape Kennedy Air Force Station Launch Complex 34 on January 27th, and it killed all 3 crew members. 3 astronauts were killed, likely by inhalation of toxic fumes from the Velcro burning quickly. Number 5. Soyuz 11. Vlad Vlokov, Gregory Dobrovolsky, and Viktor Palsov all died in space during the Soyuz 11 mission on June 30th, 1971. The astronaut crew successfully docked with the Salyut 1 orbital station and began its reactivation. On the 11th day of the mission, a fire broke out in the station, so it had to be abandoned. On June 29th, Soyuz 11 successfully undocked and began deorbiting. However, shortly after the separation from the ship, communication with the astronaut crew was interrupted. The descent vehicle landed successfully in the assigned area, but the rescue team found the astronauts dead. It was found that the astronaut death occurred as a result of depressurization and abrupt onset of decompression sickness. The astronauts tried to eliminate the air leak, however, in the extreme conditions of the fog that filled the cabin after depressurization, severe pain throughout the body, and loss of hearing due to burst eardrums, the astronauts did not immediately establish the cause of the leak and simply did not have enough time to save themselves. Number 4. Valentin Bonarenko. Valentin Bonarenko was a Soviet fighter pilot selected in 1960 for training as a cosmonaut. During a 15-day endurance experiment in a low-pressure altitude chamber with at least 50% oxygen atmosphere, Bondarenko, having completed work for the day, removed monitoring biosensors from his body and washed his skin with an alcohol-soaked cotton ball, which he then discarded. The cotton ball landed on an electric hot plate, which he was using to brew a cup of tea. The cotton ignited ignited, and Bonner-Koch tried to smother the flames with the sleeve of his woolen coveralls, which caught fire in the chamber's oxygen-rich atmosphere. Because of the pressure difference, it took a watching doctor nearly half an hour to open the chamber door. Bonner-Koch's clothing was burned until almost all the oxygen in the chamber was used up, and he had suffered third-degree burns over most of his body. The attending physician at Botkin Hospital, surgeon and traumatologist Vladimir Golahowski, recalled in 1984 that while attempting to start an intravenous drip, the only blood vessels he could find for inserting a needle were on the soles of his feet, where his flight boots had warded off the flames. The Soviet government concealed the death along with Bonner-Koch's membership of the Cosmonaut Corps until 1880, and a crater on the moon's far side is now named after him. Number 3. Columbia Space Shuttle crash. On the 1st of February 2003, the second space shuttle crash occurred. Shuttle Columbia was returning to Earth after 16 days of flight. Approximately 16 minutes before the expected landing, communication with the crew was interrupted. Eyewitnesses filmed the burning wreckage of the shuttle flying at an altitude of about 63 kilometers. All 7 astronauts were lost in space. They were Rick Husband, William C. McCool, Elon Ramon, Michael P. Anderson, Kampla Chawla, David M. Brown, and Laurel Clark. As the investigation showed, the cause of the disaster was a breakdown that arose back at the start. About 82 seconds into the flight, a piece of insulation detached from the left fairing, which struck the carbon fiber panel of the Columbia's left wing and probably left a hole in the thermal insulation layer. Because of this, after entering the dense layers of the atmosphere, the leading edge of the left wing began to heat up more than usual, and the wing began to collapse, and after it, the shuttle itself collapsed. Notably, incidents with detached pieces of thermal insulation from the shuttles were observed before, but test shows that they do not pose a threat to the astronauts. Losing Columbia became a turning point in the space shuttle program, and the shuttle astronaut flights were interrupted for several years, and in 2011 the program was finally closed due to the high risk of astronauts' lives. Number 2. Spaceship Two. On October 31st, 2014, another astronaut was lost in space. It was Michael Ellsbury, the pilot of the suborbital spacecraft Spaceship Two of Virgin Galactic. During the 55th test flight of the ship, serious anomalies were discovered, which led to the spacecraft crash. The cause was called crew error. The pilots unblocked the tail section of the vehicle ahead of time without gaining the necessary speed, and also did not perform the necessary actions to transfer the tail section to a vertical position. As a result, the ship began to rotate around its axis and then fell apart. The wreckage was scattered all over a radius of 8 kilometers. First pilot Michael Ellsbury was killed, but co-pilot Peter Sebold managed to eject. The pilot astronaut survived but was seriously injured. Fortunately, the failure did not become fatal for the Richard Branson Company. Virgin Galactic worked out its bugs, and in July 2021 carried out the first ever suborbital tourist spaceflight, ushering the area of space tourism. And coming in at number 1 is the Space Shuttle Challenger. In the 1980s, the era of space shuttles began, which finally established US supremacy in space. These were reusable rocket planes that made a real revolution in space tech, but still were not without significant shortcomings, which eventually became the cause of the biggest space travel disasters. Due to scheduling issues with what had been called GO fever, STS-51L launched in suboptimal temperatures on January 28, 1986. The cold weather weakened the O-rings that sealed each section of the tall, white solid rocket booster segments and prevented the exhaust gases from shooting out of any direction but down. The seals failed over approximately 26 degrees of the arc on the starboard side of the SRB in the lowest of 4 segment joints. Exhaust flames escaped through the breach, pushing the SRB into the large rust-colored external tank. The starboard off strut then connected the SRB to the ET was pushed into the hydrogen tank, which shot up through the intertank into the oxygen tank. This destroyed the ET structure entirely. The orbiter survived this event, but because of its orientation to the free flow aerodynamic forces, quickly disintegrated the orbiter. The crew compartment survived the breakup, and when recovered, it was discovered that several switches had been moved from their launch normal positions, indicating that the crew was conscious for some time after the breakup and tried to recover. The crew compartment impacted the ocean surface at a terminal velocity which was far too fast to survive, and all 7 members of the crew passed away. These members were F. Richard Scorby, Michael J. Smith, Ronald McNair, Elson Orzinka, Judith Resnick, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McClough. To this day, it is still unknown whether the astronauts were conscious at the time of impact, although it is judged unlikely.
We have the knocking. In 2003, Yang Liwei became the first Chinese person in space. It was a historic occasion, but it also became famous for a creepy occurrence. In 2016, Yang told an interviewer that he heard someone knocking on the outside of the spaceship on that trip. He was terrified and tried to peek out of the porthole but couldn't see anything outside. When he got back to Earth, Yang described the sound to experts. He even tried to recreate it for them, but nobody could identify it. In the years since, many people have tried to explain this strange phenomenon. Some say it could have been some space debris, but others say that this is unlikely, as space debris is few and far between. Others claim it could be the expanding and contracting of the ship due to the changing temperature of the spaceship as it orbited the Earth. Even though that's the leading theory, many people have their own theories about aliens or time travelers being responsible for the mysterious knocking sound. Moving on to number 9 now, we have alien music. In 1969, American astronauts Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan and John Young went to the far side of the moon for the Apollo 10 mission. It was going to be the final test before Apollo 11 took 3 humans to walk on the surface of the moon for the first time. When the Apollo 10 astronauts were orbiting around the far side of the moon, they took photographs of its surface. As they were working away, they began to hear music. Specifically, they heard a strange whistling sound that lasted nearly an hour. When it faded away, Commander Cernan said, "Boy, that sure is weird music. We're going to have to find out about that." Pilot Young replied, "Nobody would believe us." And for the most part, they were right. Many people couldn't explain the sound that they claimed to have heard, and so they just didn't believe it. The leading theory is that the sound came from radio interference between spacecrafts. Some people have dismissed that though, and have insisted that the astronauts would have known the difference between radio interference and their spacey music. Coming in at number 8 now, we have snakes in space. In 1994, Dr. Story Musgrave did an interview where he described his career as an astronaut, and one particular time which shook him to that day. He said, "On 2 of my missions, I still don't have an answer. I have seen a snake out there, 6, 7, 8 feet long. It is rubbery because it has internal waves in it, and it follows you for a rather long period of time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of thing brings to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there." Now usually an account like this might be dismissed, but Musgrave is a doctor, he has 6 academic degrees, is a trained mathematician, he was in the Marine Corps and was a NASA astronaut. He seems like a credible witness. He believes that there are advanced creatures existing in space itself, and that he has even tried to communicate with them in the hopes that they come down and get him. Whatever that means. Next up at number 7 now, we have docking. In 1995, famous Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield had his first space flight. His job was to relay the speed and range information to the pilot as they were docking into the Russian Mir space station. Any mistakes could have resulted in a total disaster. Too soft and they would have just bounced off. Too hard and they would have broken the space station in half, killing the 3 people on board. Everything was going smoothly, but then one of the sensors started telling them they were 32 feet away, the other said 20 feet away, which was correct. If they didn't solve the problem in 30 seconds, it was over for them. Hadfield had to calculate how far they were away in his head, timing it with his stopwatch to decide when they should fire their thrusters. Luckily, they ended up being spot on and they docked almost perfectly. It took a few minutes before the astronauts began to realize they had done it. They were alive, they had avoided a space disaster, and they had lived to tell the tale. Moving on now to number 6, we have impossible. On May 5th, 1981, Russian cosmonaut Vladimir Kovalyonok looked out of his portal of the Salyut orbital space station. He then saw something which seemed inexplicable to him. When he returned to Earth, he told the world at a conference what he had seen. He said, "Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I have never spoken on such things. The encounter you asked me about happened on May 5th, 1981 at about 6 p.m. during the Salyut mission. At that time, we were over the area of South Africa, moving towards the area of the Indian Ocean. I just made some gymnastic exercises when I saw in front of me, through a porthole, an object which I could not explain. I saw this object, and then something happened that I could not explain, something impossible according to the laws of physics. The object had this shape, elliptical, and it flew with us. From a frontal view, it looked like it would rotate in flight direction. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened, very beautiful to watch, of golden light. That was the first part. Then, 1 or 2 seconds later, a second explosion followed somewhere else, and 2 spheres appeared, golden and very beautiful. After this explosion, I just saw white smoke, then a cloud-like sphere. Before we entered the darkness, we flew through the Terminator, the twilight zone between day and night. We flew eastwards, and when we entered the darkness of the Earth's shadow, I could see them no longer. The 2 spheres never returned. That was the end of the quote. There have rarely been descriptions so vivid and detailed, and many people who hear Kovalyonok's story hold it up as proof of extraterrestrial life. Moving on now to number 5, we have toxic. In the mid-90s, Bob Kerbean took part on his first spacewalk as an astronaut. Unfortunately, disaster struck when a connector to a hose began to leak on the outside, spraying toxic ammonia all over him. He couldn't get back inside the space station covered in that stuff. He managed to stay calm and he fixed the leak, but he was still contaminated. He came up with a plan. Ammonia has a low boiling point, and so Bob decided to literally bake himself in the sunlight of space for an extra 30 minutes in order to vaporize the ammonia off him. He had to just sit out there in space, hoping that he got all the ammonia off and that he didn't poison the crew and himself when he got back into the station. It was a success. His plan worked, but it was one of the most surreal and scary moments an astronaut could ever experience. Next up at number 4 now, we have the lights. In 2005, astronaut Leroy Chiao was commander on the International Space Station for over 6 months. He was once doing a spacewalk to repair some antennas when something caught his eye. He saw some lights that seemed to be in a line, almost like an upside down check mark. They flew right past him, but his fellow astronaut didn't see because they were facing the other way. When he described the sighting to those back on the ground, they dismissed it as a fishing boat hundreds of miles below him. Chiao himself had stated that he doesn't believe there's ever been any tangible evidence that someone else is visiting Earth or has done so in the past. He has simply told his story as it is and is leaving all of the explaining up to everyone else. Coming in at number 3 now, we have the drifter. Now for some people, the biggest fear they have about space is that feeling of drifting away from the space station, unable to claw themselves back. Well, Scott Parazinski may have had the closest experience to that. He was performing a spacewalk when a jammed solar panel threatened the safety of the entire space station and the crew inside. After 72 hours, NASA came up with a plan. Scott was told to travel further away from the safety of an airlock than had ever been attempted. He later said in an interview, there was a real danger that we could do even worse damage to the space station. Then there was the potential of risk to myself because if there was any metal to metal connection with the solar panel or arcing, I could actually electrocute myself or cause ignition of the 100% oxygen in my spacesuit. The stakes were high, but Scott succeeded. Disaster was averted, but sadly many of Scott's heroics are still not known by the masses. Moving on to number 2 now, we have the secret transmission. In 1975, retired Chief of NASA Communications Systems, Maurice Chatelain, published his book, Our Cosmic Ancestors. In it, he made an extraordinary claim about the first manned mission to the moon. He said, only moments before Armstrong stepped down the ladder to set foot on the moon, 2 UFOs hovered overhead. Edwin Aldrin took several pictures of them. Some of these photographs have been published in the June 1975 issue of Modern People magazine. Now this claim was linked to the story that there were 2 minutes of radio silence after Armstrong set foot on the moon. People claim that the lost audio was of him saying, "These babies were huge, sir, enormous. Oh God, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." Now of course, all of this is speculation. An actual recording of that audio or of those pictures has never surfaced. That either means it didn't happen at all or it's been covered up very, very well. Either way, it's a creepy story. And finally, number 1 now, we have the Green Bolt. Gordon Cooper was a well-known astronaut who flew on the Mercury 9 and Gemini 5 missions. He was the last American to fly alone in space. In 1963, he flew aboard the Mercury capsule for a circumnavigational trip around the world. Everything seemed to be going okay, and then on his final orbit, as he passed over Perth, Australia, he saw a green object swing towards him at an incredible speed. At first, he thought it was just a figment of his imagination. There have been times where pilots and astronauts have seen objects like this, but their equipment detected nothing. This time was different though. The Moochia tracking station in Western Australia actually picked the object up on their radar. That was huge. Now he had something solid to back up his own experience. He reported the incident to the National Broadcasting Company. When he returned to Earth, he was eager to tell his side of the story, but Gordon claims he was approached by NBC reporters who told him they had been instructed to not question him about the sighting. All of this has only fanned the flames of a UFO conspiracy.
If you want to see more videos like this one, then you have to check out this video next. It's about mind-bending anomalies that will make you question everything. Click the video now to find out more. See you guys in that next video.